You know, if you look at the building, there's a series of monitor windows that are up high, kind of as a kidney being up high here. They just don't, not enough light gets down, and it doesn't really get down into these rooms. So as we were even touring with the contractors, there was a teacher that I think had been there 20-something years, and I mean, she was like, you know, she doesn't know if it's night or day. You can't tell. And just the ability to have some natural light, I think would, and enclosing those classrooms, it would be such a huge change for that high school. You have a great school. I mean, it's designed for 1,300 students, and you have, you know, under 600 there. So I think if you can solve this problem, you know, you have a whole different high school. Because you have the space. I mean, you have an auditorium, you have a gymnasium. The future of whatever the pool's going to offer, that's another issue. You have field space that can be modified or improved. But, you know, this is the one area that just really needs to be attacked. Oh, and I guess in the center, this is the principal suite. In simple terms, Steve, what we're proposing here, because I didn't run this by Steve, was there's two exits here. Like there's two groups of doors. The one to the north really is not used at all as an entrance. There's enough exiting in the building that that's really superfluous. And ironically, the way the school functions, because the parking lot's all to the south, they don't even need all those doors. All the action is kind of moving in the center of the building by the auditorium gym complex and to the south. So we basically, and there's a million ways you could design this, but the idea was to create a contiguous principal suite with, you know, whatever you would normally have in a suite, a workroom, offices. You'd have actually full height walls and ceilings, acoustic privacy. You'd have supervision. We took this set of doors. There'd be windows out so you could at least see what's happening. If someone comes to visit during school hours, they'd have to come through the principal's office before they can enter the building. And that same model is like what we did at the junior high and what we're proposing at Miller or Manning. That's a standard kind of design practice nowadays. So that's really what's done here, creating an appropriate nurse's office. In both this renovation, Manning, Miller, your nurses' offices, you know, really need, you know, not just renovation. They need to be expanded. They need to be brought up to today's standards. They were designed for able-bodied, you know, sick kids in the 50s. A nurse's office today with disabled students coming to your door needs to have so much more. You need to be able to do, you know, diaper changes and, you know, clothes changes and shower down. You do so much more that they're really, you don't even do, when we design nurses' offices nowadays, we don't do ADA bathrooms, what we call assisted ADA, because you need the ability of someone to go in there and for an aide to be in there and assist them. Well, if you put a toilet 18 inches from the wall, two people, you can't help somebody. So you have to use a totally different design. And that's really what we've budgeted and what we're showing at all three schools is creating new nurses' offices that would meet the needs today and off into the future. Because it's highly likely that you'll only have more students with disabilities coming to your door, not fewer. So that exists in all three renovation concepts.
I have a question. How many students do we have at the junior high?
The junior high?
Yeah.
350.
350?
That includes Sassen?
I think that's 350 in the building, yes.
I just was wondering if the high school can house 1,300. It would, and just brainstorming here.
Theoretically.
Well, it was designed for that.
Well, could we combine the high school to house the junior high and the high school?
You'd have some angry parents.
Well,
Huh?
You'd have some angry parents.
Yeah.
I know, but I'm just thinking of cost savings
ideas.
ideas.
On the high school. I mean,
Huh?
you'd have to do an
6th
extensive
graders and
addition.
12th graders.
Yeah. You'd be way short of classroom space.
Oh, would you?
I mean, the thing is, I mean, also, you got to remember that time. You know, that was the peak of the boom. You know, school boards are smart in how they design buildings in that you never design for the worst case scenario because, you know, demographics are a sine wave. I mean, they go up and down, and it would be crazy, I mean, to build a school for the peak. And then as soon as you get over the top of that, you have like empty classrooms, and the taxpayers are going, what did you do? You know, it's very often that even with good demographic data, that schools will be designed below the peak, and they'll weather the storm with temporary classrooms. And then just, you know, once they get over that hump, then get rid of the classrooms, and you're good to go for the next, you know, wave.
Well, because it just seems to me if the high school was built to house 1,300, we'll never ever get anywhere near that.
Well, that was anecdotal information that we've been told, but, I mean,
Yeah.
At 1,300 in a 70s open design sort of way.
oh, it was an open campus, I mean, it was an open campus for sure.
Kumbaya, as it were.
Okay.
This is the study about, you know, what it would cost to replace Manning. And obviously, in the effort of, you know, keeping our fee to you for the study reasonable and not spending, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars designing a school you might never build, we basically went back and based this on 2 schools that were designed and built. The advantage being they are similar in size to Manning. This is a 66,000 square foot school, so it's roughly the same size as Manning is today. It was built in 2001, 2002. Ironically, and this is kind of an interesting point, is it has more sections than Manning does in the same square footage. But that's the nature of, you know, it's hard to say that Manning is the most efficient design. I mean, think of the stairwells. By code, you really only need 2 stairs from a safety code in Manning, the north and the south end. You have 2 other stairs. So that's basically circulation space. So the amount of unused and, you know, the basement level or lower level to the south, there's a lot of space that I would call underutilized. The old library, which is a storage room now. You use a kitchen, I think, as the PTO office or storage room. The art's down there. So there's underutilized space. But it was, I thought, a good model. And then what was nice, too, is this was not an estimate. These were actual bid amounts. There were 6 general contractors that bid on this project. You need to caution, this was the low number. So obviously, someone else thought it was going to cost millions more. But this is who, they built this. It's a nice school. There's 2 of them that are similar. They're on different sites, slight modifications. This one's called Roslyn Road, and the other one is called Countryside, and they're both in Barrington. Before we go to the plan, I just want to show you, I comment on this in the executive summary, but some advantages of new design versus, you know, and kind of designing with what you have is even within a school, it's a good design practice to separate and group students by age for a lot of reasons. I mean, you know, maybe as a parent, you know, when all of a sudden Johnny comes home and he's got a new word in his vocabulary and you wonder where it came from, you know, it usually came from the playground at school because, you know, you got basically kindergarten, 1st graders with 5th graders, and there's a world of difference between those ages. Like in this school you can see here, I mean, this is their, you know, here's the drop-off for all the parents, lots of queuing. They bring the buses in a totally separate area. This whole area here, stormwater management and play fields. And you can see when this was like a summer photo. I think this was July, so those big storms we had, I mean, you could tell water was sitting there. They have different wings. This is the lowest level. This is K1. And you can see K1 has, it's not only its own playground, it has its own entrance. So when, you know, you come there, you know, those kids are entering and leaving the building in a separate area, which is a nice design practice because for safety, I mean, those kids are the highest risk, and you need to make the safest environment. So that's real common to do it that way. Between the 2 wings, they've actually created kind of a garden area that's shared by those lower levels, by K2 and by 3-4. And then you have the upper level 4-5 here, and then basically the core of the building, you have the shared functions. And then you also have the ability, and you'll see in the design here, to create those, separate those areas like the gymnasium, multipurpose rooms and stuff so they can be easily used after hours. That way you can, you know, have a secure building and have it function after hours, and then it also opens opportunities to, you know, it wasn't done here, but in some cases it's done with park districts. Just down the street, down Chicago Avenue, the Clarendon Hills Middle School, during the day, the park district is using that gymnasium, you know, and delivering services, and they contributed to the cost of construction of that school. So it's fascinating, out in kind of rural America, that is a real common model where they'll take the library district, the park district, and the school district, and they'll figure out how to get those 3 taxing bodies fused together. In many cases, they'll build the library, which is the community library, is integrated into the high school, and then they'll take and get those park district spaces and get them into, you know, elementary through the high school, so that they're really, in a way, being more efficient with, instead of having 3 separate taxing bodies. Here's the plan for Roslyn and for Countryside. This is this is a 4-section school, so you see 2 kindergarten classrooms here, 4 first-grade classrooms, and you'll see how they're clustered. There's no double-loaded corridors. These are like core areas. So in their traditional school at Barrington, they had corridors, lockers, just issues. So they didn't want that, and they also wanted to team teach. They wanted the ability to be able to supervise. If a teacher had to step out of a room, for another teacher to be able to even see that room and supervise it, and then to share and do things together as groups. So in all these wings, there's basically shared functions. These pink areas are resource areas. Like you'll see them all throughout here. This is basically a room that's shared by these 2 classrooms. It has a lot of glass, so you can look into that room from this classroom. You can see it from the corridor from the other classroom. And that's commonly a space where, if, say, a reading specialist is coming to talk to Johnny, that Johnny can go out into there. They're not in the corridor. They're right there. They have nice privacy. They can close the door. If there's a group of students that need to go off, they're usually sized for like 4 to 6 students, that if a group of students could go in there and be working on something to come back to report to the class, and they're still totally supervised by that teacher. And not only by the teacher, say, in this classroom, but the other teacher can still see them too. So it's a real nice design feature. You keep the bathrooms so the kids, like in this case on the lower level, first grade, they're not even leaving the rooms for the bathrooms. They're right there. You go to 3, 4, and the bathrooms are in that core wing, in that grouping, so that you're able to keep supervision. You can take a group out there. You're not walking very far. And then you have the upper level, 4th and 5th grade. This purple area in the middle is the media center and computer labs. This is the administrative suite and faculty spaces. And then you get into art and music, a multi-purpose space that has a stage that opens to both the gymnasium and the multi-purpose room, and then also doubles as a cafeteria area, and then basically buildings and grounds and support spaces. And that's the whirlwind tool through the drawings. And then I'd love to I know that was a lot of information. I felt bad sending you out all those attachments and everything, but I'm glad we sent them in pieces, because especially when we sent out some of the cost estimates, I thought I heard people like falling to the floor. I mean, they're big numbers, but I mean they're numbers that they're totally in line with all the costs, projects we've done. We vetted these things thoroughly with DCI. We brought in subcontractors to check them. They are just a working study. You could take them and decide, where you wanted to go. But I think there's a lot of good data there that can help you make decisions as you move forward. Whether you're going to replace Manning or renovate it. I mean, that's been, as long as I've worked with this district, that has been kind of question number one. You could look at it and say, are you willing to do that? One thing I wanted to comment, because I sent that estimate out a second time. It was interesting, because I didn't even notice it initially, that when we did the renovation scenario, we ended up being bigger than that Roslyn Road school. So I just made the range a little different. So if you really want to look apples to apples, if you're talking 2 79,000 square foot buildings, here's the renovation addition cost of Manning, and here's this. I think the reality is probably somewhere in between, because I do think if you started over, like say you built a totally new Manning, I would think that you probably would get down closer to the size of a Roslyn versus the 79,000 square feet, because you'd probably find out a more efficient way. You might even just say, no, that's too rich. We got to somehow live here. You definitely would want to, as you move forward, you want to make sure that your demographic studies are up to date. So, what are they projecting? Because you need to, see where that curve's going, so that whatever you do with facilities, that it's prudent, that you're not going to overbuild and then have enrollments drop to the point where you have, vacant classrooms in Manning. So that's a lot of talking. I'd love to answer questions.
Well, it seemed like that the renovation numbers and the new elementary numbers, there really wasn't a huge gap, a huge difference between them. So I guess my question to you is, other than the observation you made about the possible inequity issue that we might have if we built a new Manning and then, renovated Miller. I wonder if it's really if it's really a good idea to just put all that money into renovating Manning if the numbers are really, not all that
I mean, at the
different?
lowest, you're talking about a $5 million delta. That's a lot of money.
Well, 'cause,
Lowest level.
yeah, the estimate new was around 23 million.
Right.
The
So then you're
estimate on the
Wasn't it
renovation, but the renovation, as you point out.
Wasn't it 18 to 24?
No, it was 20, what was it?
I have
But like,
18 to
if you looked at
24.
both,
21 to
to make them
24.
even, for a point of comparison, the best comparison would be two 79,000 square foot schools. So you're talking basically 14 to 15 million versus 24 million.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a $9 million, $8 to $9 million difference.
And the
That's
14 to 15, whatever the 15 call it.
Right.
Includes, you designed in full upgrades of all the all the building systems, including air conditioning.
Right, because I think it's important, like,
So we're not just buying a few square feet.
no, this is like every
Buy-in.
room getting new lighting, new ceilings, new flooring, all the walls painted, power. I mean, right now, if the PTA or PTO, however you describe it here, if they came in to give Mike a bunch of smart boards or LCD projectors, he doesn't have power to install them. I mean, it's a challenge because it's just not there. So you're talking now all the power you need, the data telecom, everything up to today's standards, like you built a brand new school. There's some advantages to saving Manning because there's spaces in Manning that really don't need a whole lot of work and are reflected in these numbers. You have a music room that is amazing for an elementary school. They typically schools don't have those. I mean, it's a better music room. I mean, even though it's older, it's a better music room than what was built here.
Okay.
It's probably better acoustically. It's a bigger space. It has tiers, which was done back in that day. I'm sure the music teacher wishes they weren't there, but, it's a better space. You have that cafeteria seating area that's dedicated to that use. And you use it, it's more of a multi-purpose room because after school activities, it's always hopping at the end of the day. I mean, it always seems to be something going on down there. You're not spending anything other than basically getting those infrastructure up to date on those spaces. Those foundations, all those costs you're just using them. The building itself, has some strong points. Those classrooms in the 60s and the 50s are decent classrooms. At the end of this project, they would look newer than the ones that are in Miller right now. And they'd have, parabolic lighting, they'd be set. So, you could take that, and that's one reason, it was just, one concept, but, I wanted you to see that it could be different. You could choose to do the Manning renovation and not do that addition on the south end. That's clearly, that's not as important as, say, like the principal's addition. You could drop that and know that you could do it in the future. The only reason I put that in there is with, 400 to 500 students, it's a big group. I think you're using that cafeteria area as a multi-purpose room, kinda. A typical new school design would have a full gym and a half to allow, multiple things to happen there. But you could just say, well, we're not going to do that right now. Maybe you do something more modest, like maybe you want the storage for the gym, but you knock down that blind spot and you build a small storage addition that, is now, $100 a square foot versus $300, and you wait and you can do that in the future.
Plus,
So there's options there.
doesn't that not take into account like what you do with the students while you're rebuilding a school? If you
Building a brand new school?
built a brand new school.
Well, there's two possible options, and it would be a big study just to figure that out. But what we're proposing here is likely building it across the street, in that playground
Stay in the old
area.
School while the new one's
You
being
build that
built.
new school, possibly you might have to basically, work with the village and see, does Linden continue to be a through street? Does it become a cul-de-sac? What are the options there? And then you knock down the existing school and turn that into play space. And in a way, there's some benefit to that because you move the school proper away from the more urban part of town into, where it's surrounded by single-family homes. Another option, though, would be a real challenge, especially for someone like, Pete, who would have to build it, is you do a phased replacement. You say you start and you build a portion on the north playground, and you maybe knock down the gym and you build, two halves. That's been done. When it's done a lot of times in the urban areas because you have no other option. You got to kind of build and knock down. So I mean, it's a challenge. The renovations are going to be easier because you can likely just continue on, and each summer you turn over and they'd see something happening, some benefit. And the most exciting thing would be, I mean, just imagine like whoever's teaching in that little classroom on the second floor, that is almost claustrophobic, moving them to where, Judy Duhai is. I mean, if you just moved them, didn't do anything to the room, it would be like, oh, you'd be heroes, because that is such an improvement. So anything you can do, I mean, I thought what you were talking about earlier, Joel, about, focusing, safety, educational experience. Accessibility is another one. I can't remember, I was writing down your notes, and I don't remember if you had that in there, but that is a big one, especially at a school like Manning that is inherently very inaccessible today. And you have, I think, a young girl who's in even kindergarten level now, or I can't remember what level she's at. And I'm surprised you haven't had that challenge in the past. My guess is you probably had parents look at the school and move somewhere else where there was a more accessible school. Which is a terrible option. I mean, it can be accessible, but accessibility, to me, it's important. It'll help not just students with disabilities, but a faculty member with a bad hip. You have parent-teacher conferences. People coming in and can they get there? I know somewhere in our tours, I mean, it came up where they couldn't get grandma. Grandma wanted to come and wouldn't work. I mean, couldn't get them in the building. So.
My preference personally is not necessarily to talk about the design things, because there's a ton of stuff to love about the design stuff, but rather about the process at this point going forward. So what I personally would love to see happen out of this is the convening of a very high quality facilities committee to look primarily at the rehabilitation scenarios and the renovation scenarios. That's going to be and acknowledging that is probably going to require an iterative process in terms of communication with the board, because there will be questions along that way, sort of is there an economic target, and how does that work, because this is all, whether it's 31 million for all of this or whether it's 20 million for something less. It all backs into a number that represents something that requires perhaps a referendum. Right. And then the third question is there a number sort of below 12 million or something like that we can do that has a meaningful impact that may not require a referendum?
I mean, Dan and I, that's a good point, because remember we were on the facility committee together, and probably one of the early questions, because it was a big group. I remember it vividly. Kept going, are we talking about money? Because there'd be people in the room, they're like, why are we talking about this? It will never happen. It's going to cost too much or whatever. And the guide was, no, just talk about function and what a school should be, how it should work, what should be first grade, second grade, what should the school be, and don't worry about cost. I mean, now you have some data, and you could, I can't remember how it came up in the conversation before, where maybe it was Shannon, where you could go and you could say and set a level and go, okay, if this was the budget, what would you think was most important, and what would you do with that money? And it would be interesting to see what the outcome would be.
What I'd like to see is you convene that committee, go through your design, talk about all the things you've talked about with them, brainstorm with that committee in particular about what, in terms of priority, because one of the first things I noticed on the Manning drawing was that south addition. You could probably do without that right away. Right. It's a wonderful idea, but the thing I think that we're at the top of the list for Manning was security, ingress, egress, and systems. So, and for Miller, the same thing: security, ingress, egress. Although the space issues at Miller, vis-a-vis the art areas and music areas and that kind of stuff are probably more critical at Miller as well. So there's some combination of a group of smart people that can figure out how to make that work at 15 million as opposed to 31.
I think we can't forget about the high school.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And closing those rooms.
Absolutely. And part of the high school discussion should be, at some point, the committee should frankly come back to the board and ask us this simple question, which is, we can figure out a way to put the administration in the high school. Is that a conversation you want us to pursue? Is that a conversation you want us to pursue? Is that a design that you want us to pursue? Because that leads to the question, what do you do with South? And I think we have to answer that question ultimately.
Yeah, but I think, you know, the points that you brought up are very important, but I heard what you said about the academics and the environment at the high school not being conducive, especially to the students that might be, you know, C and D students. And I believe that that is very accurate, because that has to be difficult.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we as architects, especially if you're involved in educational design, there's always the question. I mean, does the architect? I mean, they'll love to think that somehow they impact, you know, how bright these kids become. But you know, what is the cause-effect relationship between design and student learning? Recently, they've really started focusing, you know, less on the design and the nature, but on acoustics, because they do know that if you're in the back row in a classroom, sometimes there's issues with can they really hear? Because the teacher, you know, turns to the board. Are they hearing even what the teacher's saying? Are there glare problems? Is that univentilator going? And I think I shared with you earlier how my son had an issue, and we moved him up, and all of a sudden the issue went away. I mean, I know enough that when I go to conferences and stuff, I like to sit up at the front. I mean, number one, it's, you know, it keeps me more engaged, and if it's not an exciting topic, you can stay, you know, more engaged in it. But you know, I like to be at the front because you can know more what's going on. You can hear the discussions, and acoustics are big. So much to the point that there's a lot of talk about putting microphones and speakers in a standard classroom. That just having, you know, like pencil mics like this up near the front, and then having the speakers in the back so that you can reinforce what's happening at the front of the classroom for those kids in the back. Because especially like some kids, I mean, they want to be in the back, you know, and then the teacher's job is to kind of get them in the front. But I mean, so acoustically, and then you take the high school where, you know, if I'm in the back and now I'm hearing Spanish, you know, 2 doors down, I mean, it's got to be a challenge. And I think those are the students especially that you need to be helping. And the high school, you know, whenever that project occurs, I mean, it's going to be a big change and a big positive. I mean, not like a little incremental thing. It will be a noticeable difference. And
well, I'd like to see the facilities committee work on this as well. And I would also like to look at, I know one thing we talked about in the past was taking the facility at South and maybe doing an early childhood center or, you know, all-day kindergarten or something along those lines. I would like to have the committee look at that, because I worry about, you know, if we, you know, you talk about in the future, if you take a building like South School and you sell it, it's gone forever then. Right. And I worry in this day and age what we would even get for that right now. So if we, you know, to try to keep our options open, is this the time to be talking about that? And then I would like to kind of look and see if an early childhood center or full-day kindergarten would be an option, in addition to using that for administration or something along those lines. I think those would be some interesting conversations.
It's really difficult, especially in an older community like this where you don't know the future and you have no idea, like with enrollments. I mean, there's certainly, Westmont still has a lot of candidates for turnover and churn and enrollment changes, because of just, you know, there's still a decent inventory of what you call like World War II, you know, or 1950s houses that could get candidates. And selling land as a district has a lot of risk. I mean, New Trier is one of our clients. They almost sold their Northfield campus in the 80s. The state police were going to buy it from them. And then all of a sudden a citizens group rose up and opposed them. And thank God they did it, because at that time they were trending downwards. They got down to 2,700 students. Right. They have 4,400 now. Yeah. If they had sold that land, I mean, there's no land out there. I mean, who knows what they would have done. I mean, they
7 years from now, they may be back down to 2,700.
Right. But what they ended up doing, which worked to their advantage, they rented out the building, right, and then they reopened it as a freshman campus. And they know already that if enrollments go back down, they will close the building, go over to Winnetka, and they'll keep the building and rent it out.
And that's, I think we have the same thing. We don't, you know, Westmont, we don't have a lot of wide open areas ourselves, so.
Right.
That was one of the reasons why we closed it in the first place and why we're renting it out right now, is so that we can get the revenue. So that might be an option, is to just keep renting it out for a while. But for us to, reopen it and put money into it right now is probably not a good idea.
Well, and using it as a school, as Steve pointed out earlier, that you got to bring a whole bunch of new stuff, just in terms of just electrical and all this other kind of stuff to the building from a block away or a couple blocks away. You can't just take what's there and do some walls. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I certainly think the committee needs to have a wide group involvement, and certainly involvement from the South community, particularly with an interest in what is to become of the school that's in their neighborhood. That's just, I mean, it currently is being rented out, but is there a role for it? Does the community want a role for it, or do they want to look at strictly moving towards updating Manning and Miller and not doing anything with South? But I think we certainly need to hear from
And the high
our
school,
community.
updating the high school as well, obviously.
And absolutely that too.
Right, and I think that the committee, needs to be a wide variety of people, that well represent the whole community, since we are a community unit school district.
And I think it's always helpful, also has staff from like all levels, from kindergarten to high school administrators. I mean, it's important to get everyone's vantage point because they all have an interesting view. When we, or as a committee, it probably wasn't until the previous committee, until we really started talking about, special student services, special ed. I mean, it was all of a sudden like a light went on how there's this hidden deficiency in Miller and Manning that it's hard to see because, number one, you don't really have space for. I mean, they're like moving around, pulling desks out in the hallway, they're in corners, or in the, there's 3 people in a classroom. You're delivering all these services, and it's a big part of what you do, but you don't have the space for it. I mean, that was one reason, and you can see in the concept where I wanted to create those spaces so that you can be delivering those crucial services in the right environment, where, if you're doing, some kind of instruction with a young student, that there's privacy, that, that student knows that he's with that aide, and that, what they're discussing and whatever challenges that student may have are between the 2 of them and isn't being overheard by the class, because, I mean, kids can be brutal, and, that you need that kind of privacy. So, I mean, that's a hidden thing, and it was, I mean, thank God we kind of got there as a committee, but I think, as broad as you can be, all segments of the town as far as the communities go, representatives from the village, Park District, that was helpful. We had someone before, and because I do think, with financial constraints, the ability to team, I mean, you have that pool at the high school, which is a big question mark, is there something you can do there? I think even though the study didn't talk about the junior high, they need to be included. There's still needs there. I mean, they're not, that's your strongest building, as far as not having a glaring deficiency, but it still has needs. I mean, so they need to be kept in the loop. And those students, those teachers, I mean, they're moving on to the high school. They're all interrelated. It's all the same. You want to serve them through. So I think as broad as you can make it, it never hurts to have more. And then you also, I mean, it's tiring, and you lose people. So if you have enough people, when someone doesn't make the meeting, they can get informed when, they talk to their neighbors or see other people. They know that, they understand what's happening.
And I'm assuming that you're going to be part of that committee, correct?
I'd love to. It'd be helpful.
Okay.
And having said that, I know, Kevin, you've been receiving people, so I guess we'll ask again if there's anyone else who would like to, in the community, be participating in that, just so we make sure that we do get a broad range of our community and stuff like that, so. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Well,
Anything else?
This was
No.
truly amazing.
Thank you.
and Well done.
Okay. Well, feel free, if you have any questions or whatever, feel free to shoot me an email, call me. I know there was a lot there. It was too much for the sponge, but it's good information. I mean, I'm sure you'll think of it and go, hey, what about this? And, feel free to call me. I'd love to talk.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Okay. Next item on the agenda is board reports.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. On March 12th, our Westmont High School flag team went to state, and they won first place, which is not a surprise. Over the last several years, they've been consistently winning first and second place, and so I just wanted to congratulate them. And I wanted to request, Kevin, if possible, if we could ask them to come to the next meeting so that we can recognize them. And also, if they could bring a recording of their performance, their state performance. It shouldn't be very long, just a few minutes. I think it would be great for us to see that. And I just wanted to comment that they're one of our most consistently high-performing teams that we have at the high school, and that they have to practice quite regularly, and it takes a lot of precision and skill to achieve this level of success. And I just wanted to say that I think it's really remarkable that over the years that they have consistently won first and second place at state. And once again, I just want to congratulate them.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other board reports at this time?
Just a request, Kevin, it's time to pull together a long-range finance planning committee. So, you know, as long as we're forming committees, put out the APB.
Yes, we are.
You know, ideally, that's a, first off, it's a district committee as opposed to a board committee. There probably should only be one board member on that to avoid the board issues, so that they can work, so that they can actually get together and work, you know, pretty intensely together. Obviously, you know, we talked about memberships, it's community members, bargaining unit reps, a village rep, some of the administration, and the idea being it needs to understand and ultimately recommend to us or offer some recommendations and alternatives about fixing our long-term economic situation.
And I'll just add to that, I mean, if, as long as the meeting is posted, I mean, multiple board members could come to the meeting. I would, you know, it'd be something I might sit in on. So I think it should just post the meeting, and then, you know, you can, don't run into those board issues that you're referring to.
Okay, anything else? Then, special education, Mr. Price?
No report since the last board meeting.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is finance. Are you going to do these?
Sure, I can do run you through it quickly. In your board book, first is the lunch program, lunch receipts. And as Kim has pointed out, ongoingly, our revenues are down, and our expenditures are outpacing our revenues. And that is one area that we're looking at. Also, in terms of staffing, one of the things that Kim was able to determine was that one of the cost containments for last year was reducing the
French fries?
pardon me? Well, the French fries, but also the oh, what is it? I just had it. But basically, the catering. That's it. Catering, because for various district meetings and so forth, we would rely on our cafeteria staff to provide the food and so forth, and so to reduce that cost. At the same time, there wasn't an analysis of staffing of the cafeteria, so we're still utilizing, the hours reflect the time needed to provide those catering services, but we're really not, there's not the same demand. So going into next year, we already know that we're going to be able to see a cost savings in terms of how we're staffing and the hours that we're employing cafeteria personnel. So we are, you know, taking a look at that. You also have all the fund balances for the activity accounts are in your board book for your review. We have our position statement, which shows our fund balance and cash on hand, which is something that we're monitoring. Obviously, we're still not receiving state revenue. We've received a little bit, but not, we have more that's been vouchered versus receiving, and so we're watching that, and obviously this is something for us, as Dan referenced, looking at our long-range finance committee, because we know that that fund balance is something that we're going to need to be concerned about in the future. In terms of what's going on with the fund balances, again, for the ed fund, the operating fund, and transportation fund, we are running, in terms of revenue, higher than our 3-year average. But again, that's due to, in December, we received reimbursements for the prior fiscal year. So the reason why we look like we're ahead is because of previous year's fiscal year, and again, the state still owes us for this year. Our expenditures are right in line for where we should be, and in some cases, we're running better than our 3-year projection. So definitely, we're monitoring our expenditures as well as our receipts. And then you also have the bills for the month as well.
Okay, any questions?
I have one question related to the expenditures. Is there a budgeted dollar amount for attorney's fees?
Yes.
So, okay, and do we know how we track against that as we move through each year? I mean, because that's an
Right.
item that can really
Right.
dip or spike or can have a
Right.
lot of movement.
Well, typically, like, for instance, with, you look at what you're anticipating in terms of negotiations. Typically, when you have a year with negotiations, you anticipate a little bit more in terms of fees, and so you'll build that in. And you just, it's, that's one of those that you look at trends and you kind of eyeball it and do an average type of a situation. But you do anticipate some of the things that you anticipate will create attorney's fees. For instance, if you were going into a significant renovation, you would build in some additional fees for review of contracts and those types of things.
Okay.
That's a good question, Shannon. We actually have software here that, for all of our line items, that shows like year-to-date, what your budget amount was and how much you've spent year-to-date. Does the school district have
Yes.
that kind of report?
Because we get this laundry
So
list
we really
of
never know.
bills.
The board never knows how the district is doing.
On a line-by-line basis, and that's actually what, she does it, and historically,
Yeah, I mean, we know.
the report that's been presented
we know
has always been this
totally.
aggregate one, which is
Right.
by fund, right?
Right,
But
by
not
fund.
not line items within funds.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
that's
I
like
don't
an
know.
Excel spreadsheet or a Skyward project, so.
Well, and Kim does have those reports in Skyward. I mean, Kim reviews those reports by the line item. It would be a pretty significant because of all the account
Yeah, so I
numbers.
suppose if anybody ever has any questions, they can just go in and take a look
Right.
at that.
Well, so along those lines, is there a threshold if we were dramatically over, under, or trending the wrong way, where she would then bring that to our attention?
Oh, yes.
Because
Right.
we as a board don't want to look at every line item every
Right.
week, every
Right.
month. That's not our responsibility, but is there an expectation of when it does become our responsibility, or we should be made aware?
Right, and those are things that Kim would bring to the board's attention. If, if it's just going to be, you're going to be over budget a small amount, no, but then if it was going to be something significant, then she would bring it to the board's attention with the reason why we're anticipating being over budget.
And again, historically, we as a board tend to see those more detailed differences between budget and actual when we get the memo that accompanies a motion to approve amended budgets. Because that's where the conversation goes, well, we're 50,000 off here and 50,000 better off here, and it all aggregates to kind of something close to zero.
I think we would know. I think generally we even know, even before then, like if it's like 10,000 or 5,000 or something
Yeah.
like that.
Or even in our weekly updates, I think Kim has been kind of letting us know if something needs to be tweaked.
Well, no, well, as Dan pointed out, though, it's really been about the fund balances.
Right,
It's
right.
not been,
Right.
It's not
and
a
there may
line
not be
item
anything to
discussion.
report. I mean,
Right.
she
Right,
may
and-
not have had to report anything to us because we may not be off track, but I was just curious, since my time here, I hadn't heard or seen anything, if there was a standard or threshold or an expectation where, when it sort of gets to a certain point, that would then come to our attention.
Right.
Yeah, but you're right, Dan. We usually do at the end of the year, so,
Yeah, and it happens with the budget memo, too.
Right.
The budget memo is, 5 pages of wonderful reading. So it's very detailed.
Okay, any other questions for that? Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the bills for the month of March 2011 in the amount of $977,831.46 as presented in attachment F4.
So moved.
second.
Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Mrs. Luback?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Are there any public comments? Okay, just before we go into closed session, a couple of future meetings. Discipline Committee meeting is April 6th at 6 o'clock at the high school. The next school board meeting will be April 12th at the Village Hall. And very important is the Harlem Wizards event, April 21st at the Westmont High School.
Do we
Get your
know how
tickets
the
for that
ticket
soon.
sales, how the ticket sales are going with
They're going
that?
very fast.
Okay.
So, and right now it's open to the schools, and after that it will be open to the public, so if you haven't bought your tickets yet, please do so ASAP. And Kathy, you can certainly, you don't have anyone in the schools, but,
Yeah, oh, I
wanted
definitely,
to,
yeah, I
you
do, yeah.
okay. Then the chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing personnel issues.
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mrs. Luback?
Yes.
There will not be a vote after closed session.